The sand beneath her boots whispered death with every step, and Clara Brennan welcomed the sound as she walked deeper into the Arizona Territory desert under a moon so bright it turned the saguaros into silent witnesses of her final journey. She had left everything behind in Tombstone: the boarding house room with its peeling wallpaper, the half-eaten meal on the table, the letters from her sister back in Philadelphia that she could no longer bear to read. 23 years old and already hollow, already certain that the world had nothing left to offer her except this: a peaceful dissolution into the endless sweep of sand and stone. The November night of 1881 was cool against her skin, a mercy she had not expected, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders more from habit than need. Her dark hair, usually pinned into a respectable bun, hung loose down her back, and she had left her bonnet behind deliberately. There was no need for propriety where she was going. The town lights faded behind her, swallowed by distance and darkness, and Clara felt something close to relief. No more pitying glances from the women at the general store. No more whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. No more waking up to remember, fresh each morning, that Thomas was dead, that the baby had never drawn breath, that she had crossed half a continent for a life that had crumbled to dust in her hands. She did not hear him following at first. The wind carried sounds strangely in the desert, and her own thoughts were loud enough to drown out the careful footfalls behind her. It was only when she had walked for perhaps half an hour, when Tombstone was nothing but a smudge of light on the horizon, that she heard the voice. "You are headed in the wrong direction if you are looking for anywhere in particular." Clara spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. A man stood perhaps 20 feet behind her, tall and lean in the moonlight, his hat pulled low over his face. She could see the glint of something metal at his hip, a gun, she realized, and for a moment fear cut through her numbness. "I am not looking for anywhere," she said, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Please leave me alone." "Cannot do that," the man said, and took a few steps closer. Now she could see him better, younger than she had first thought, perhaps 26 or 27, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the desert sun. His eyes, shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, were watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "This desert does not forgive mistakes, and you are making one." "It is not a mistake," Clara said sharply, "and it is not your concern. I am making it my concern." He stopped a respectful distance away, but she could see him clearly now. There was dust on his clothes, on the worn leather of his chaps, on the boots that had carried him across who knew how many miles of hard country. A bandana hung loose around his neck, and his hands, she noticed his hands particularly, rested easy at his sides, not threatening but ready. "My name is James Garrett. I was leaving town when I saw you walking out like you were on a Sunday stroll, except no one strolls into the desert at midnight unless they have given up on seeing morning." Clara felt something hot and angry rise in her chest. "You know nothing about me." "I know enough," James said quietly. "I know that look. I have seen it before, on men after battles, on women who have lost everything. I know what it means when someone walks into the desert without water, without supplies, without any intention of coming back. Then you know you should let me go." Clara turned away from him, resuming her walk. The sand pulled at her skirts, made each step an effort, but she pushed forward. Behind her, she heard him following. "I will not do that." His voice was closer now, and she realized he had closed some of the distance between them. "I will walk with you if that is what you want. I will talk to you, but I will not let you do this alone, and I will not let you do it without someone trying to convince you otherwise." "You cannot talk me out of this," Clara said, but she did not tell him to go away again. Perhaps it was the loneliness in his voice, or perhaps it was simply that she was tired of being alone with her own thoughts. "You do not understand what I have lost." "Then tell me," James said. "We have all night. The sun will not rise for hours yet. Tell me what brought you out here, and I will listen." Clara kept walking, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the mountains rose like dark teeth against the star-scattered sky. For a long moment she said nothing, and James matched her pace, walking beside her now but maintaining that careful distance. Finally, she spoke, and the words came out rough, like they had been stored too long in a dusty place. "I came here from Philadelphia 8 months ago," she said. "I was engaged to a man named Thomas Brennan. He had come west 2 years earlier to make his fortune, and he wrote me such letters. He said Arizona was beautiful, that Tombstone was growing, that he had a position at the mining company and prospects for advancement. He said we would have a good life here, that we would build something together." James said nothing, just listened, and somehow that made it easier to continue. "We were married 3 days after I arrived. He was everything he had promised in his letters, kind, hardworking, honest. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive." Clara's voice caught and she swallowed hard. "6 weeks later there was an accident at the mine, a collapse. They brought him home to me in pieces, or what was left of him. I was already pregnant, though I had not told him yet. I had been waiting for the right moment. The desert stretched out before them, vast and indifferent. Clara felt tears on her cheeks but did not bother to wipe them away. I lost the baby 3 months later. A girl, the doctor said, though she never lived long enough to open her eyes. I buried her next to Thomas in the cemetery on the hill, and I thought about joining them that very day. But I was a coward. I kept living, kept going through the motions, kept pretending there was some reason to wake up each morning. Tonight, I finally stopped pretending." James was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "I am sorry for your losses. That is a heavy burden for anyone to carry. Condolences do not bring them back," Clara said bitterly. "Nothing brings them back. I am alone in a place I never wanted to be, with no family, no future, no hope. Tell me, Mr. Garrett, why should I not walk into this desert and let it take me? What possible reason could you give me to turn around?" "Because you are still here," James said. "Because some part of you, even now, is fighting to survive. If you truly wanted to die, you would have found an easier way. But you chose this. A long walk in the cold with time to think, with time to change your mind. That tells me something." Clara stopped walking and turned to face him. In the moonlight, his face was all plains and shadows, but his eyes were clear and direct. "It tells you nothing except that I am a coward about everything, even this." "It tells me you are uncertain," James corrected gently. "And uncertainty means hope, even if you cannot see it right now." "You are wrong." But even as she said it, Clara felt something shift inside her, something she could not quite name. She started walking again, and James fell into step beside her. "Let me tell you something about myself," James said after a moment. "I was a soldier once during the war. I was 17 when I enlisted, too young and too stupid to know what I was getting into. I saw things that no one should have to see. I did things that I am not proud of. When it ended, I came west because I could not go home. How could I face my mother, my sisters, knowing what I had become?" Clara glanced at him, seeing him differently now. "What happened?" "I drifted for a while. I worked cattle drives, hired out my gun to whoever would pay, did jobs I am not going to talk about with a lady. I drank too much, fought too much, stopped caring whether I lived or died. One night, about 3 years ago, I got into a fight in a saloon in Tucson. Fellow pulled a knife on me, and I barely felt it when he cut me. I would have let him finish the job, but someone else intervened. An older man, a rancher, pulled me out of there and took me back to his place." "Why?" Clara asked, finding herself genuinely curious despite everything. "I asked him that same question," James said with a slight smile. "He said he saw something in me worth saving, though I could not imagine what. He let me work on his ranch, gave me food and a place to sleep and something to do with my hands. He did not ask about my past, did not judge me for what I had been. He just gave me a chance to be something different." "And did you take it?" Clara asked. "I did," James said. "I worked for him for 2 years, learned the ranching business, learned how to be around people again without wanting to fight or run. He died last spring. His heart just gave out one morning, but he left me a small piece of land in his will. Not much, just enough for a few head of cattle and a cabin that needs work, but it is mine, and it is a start. They walked in silence for a while, and Clara found herself thinking about what he had said. The desert around them was not the dead thing she had imagined. Now that her eyes had adjusted to the darkness, she could see life everywhere. The small tracks of rodents in the sand, the shadow of a coyote slinking between the cacti, the flutter of a bat overhead. The desert was full of creatures that survived against impossible odds, that found water where there seemed to be none, that endured heat and cold and predators and still went on living. "Why did you follow me?" she asked finally. "You do not know me. For all you know, I could be a terrible person who deserves everything that has happened to her." James shook his head. "No one deserves what you have been through, and I followed you because I know what it is like to be in that dark place where death seems like the only way out. I know how loud that voice can be, the one that tells you nothing will ever get better, that you are broken beyond repair. But I also know that voice is a liar." "It does not feel like a lie," Clara whispered. "I know," James said, "but that does not make it true." They walked on, and Clara found herself talking again, telling him things she had not told anyone. She spoke about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about her father who had remarried quickly, and seemed relieved when Clara became engaged and moved away. She talked about the journey west, the stagecoaches and the trains and the endless miles of landscape that looked nothing like the green hills of Pennsylvania. She described Thomas, not as the idealized husband she had tried to remember, but as he truly was: good-hearted but sometimes distant, excited about his work but not always attentive to her needs, a man she had loved but had not really known. James listened to all of it without interrupting, without offering platitudes or easy solutions. When she fell silent, he began to talk again, telling her about his own life. He spoke about growing up in Kentucky, about the farm his family had owned and lost, about the war that had torn everything apart. He told her about the friends he had lost, the choices he regretted, the years he had spent trying to forget who he had been. "I am not going to stand here and tell you that everything happens for a reason," James said as they climbed a small rise in the land. "I do not believe that. I think terrible things happen to good people, and there is no grand design, no cosmic plan that makes it all make sense. But I do believe that we can choose what we do with the pain. We can let it destroy us, or we can use it to understand others who are hurting. We can let it close us off, or we can let it crack us open." Clara stopped at the top of the rise and looked back toward Tombstone. The lights were very distant now, barely visible. She could die out here, she realized. It would be easy. James would not be able to stop her if she truly committed to it. But something had shifted in the last hour of walking and talking. The numbness that had carried her into the desert was giving way to something else, not hope exactly, but a kind of curiosity. What would James say next? Where would this conversation lead? What would the sunrise look like from out here? "I am not ready to go back," she said quietly. "Then we will keep walking," James replied. "We have time." They descended the rise and continued into the deeper desert. The terrain grew rougher here, studded with rocks and thorny vegetation that caught at Clara's skirts. James offered his hand to help her over the difficult spots, and she took it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. He was patient with her slow progress, never rushing, never showing frustration. "Tell me about this land you inherited," Clara said, wanting to keep the conversation going, wanting to hear his voice. It was a good voice, she realized, low and steady with a hint of Kentucky still in it despite the years. "It is about 15 miles north of Tucson," James said. "High desert country with good grass if you know where to find it. There is a creek that runs most of the year and some cottonwood trees that provide shade. The cabin is small, just one room really, but it is solid. The rancher who left it to me, his name was Henry Dalton. He built it himself 40 years ago when he first came to the territory." "It sounds peaceful," Clara said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "It can be," James agreed, "but it is also hard work and lonely." I have been spending most of my time in Tombstone lately, trying to earn enough money to buy more cattle to fix up the place properly. I was actually heading back there tonight when I saw you leaving town. Clara absorbed this information. So by following me, you have delayed your journey. Some things are more important than schedules, James said simply. They walked on, and Clara found herself asking more questions. What kind of cattle did he raise? What were his plans for the ranch? Did he intend to stay in Arizona, or was this just a temporary situation? James answered everything willingly, and gradually, Clara began to form a picture of his life. Solitary but not unhappy, simple but not without purpose. He was building something, she realized. Slowly, patiently, he was constructing a life from the wreckage of his past. "Do you ever think about going back east?" she asked. James considered the question. "Sometimes. I have sisters there, nieces and nephews I have never met, but I am not the same person who left. The boy who grew up on that Kentucky farm died in the war. The man I am now belongs here in this hard country. Does that make sense?" "Yes," Clara said, surprised by how much sense it made. "I think I understand that. When Thomas died, I thought about going back to Philadelphia. My sister would have taken me in, I think. But I could not imagine being that person again, the girl I was before I came here. She is gone just as surely as Thomas is gone." "Then who are you now?" James asked. Clara had no answer for that. They walked in silence for a while, the desert spreading out around them in shades of silver and shadow. The moon had moved across the sky, marking the passage of time, and Clara realized they had been walking for hours. Her feet hurt, her legs ached, but she felt more alive than she had in months. The physical discomfort was real and immediate, cutting through the fog of grief that had surrounded her for so long. "Can I tell you something?" James said after a while. "You do not have to respond or even acknowledge it. I just want to say it." "All right," Clara said warily. "When I saw you leaving town tonight, something in my chest tightened up. I did not know you, had never seen you before, but I recognized that walk. I have walked that way myself, though I never made it as far as you have. And I thought, here is someone who is hurting so badly that death seems like mercy. Here is someone who needs to know that she is not alone, even if she thinks she wants to be. So I followed you, and I am glad I did, because you have been walking and talking with me for hours now, and that tells me you have not given up completely. It tells me some part of you wants to live, even if it hurts." Clara felt tears burning in her eyes again. "I do not know if I want to live," she said honestly. "I only know that I am tired of feeling this way. I am tired of waking up sad, of going to bed sad, of moving through each day like I am underwater. I am tired of being alone." "You are not alone right now," James pointed out gently. "No," Clara agreed. "I am not. And that is strange, is it not? I came out here to be completely alone, and instead I am walking through the desert with a stranger who insists on keeping me company." "I am happy to remain a stranger if you prefer," James said with a hint of humor. "But I hope we might be friends by the time the sun comes up." Despite everything, Clara felt herself smile slightly. "You are very persistent, Mr. Garrett." "James, please, and yes, I am. It is one of my few virtues." They walked on, and Clara found herself relaxing in his presence. James had a way of talking that was easy and undemanding. He shared stories from his life without seeming to expect anything in return, asked questions without prying, and respected the silences when they fell. He told her about learning to work with horses, about a particularly stubborn mare who had taught him patience. He described the landscape around his ranch, the way the light turned everything gold at sunset, the sound of the creek running over stones. He talked about his plans for the future, modest plans, nothing grand or ambitious, just the hope of building something sustainable and passing it on someday. "Passing it on to whom?" Clara asked. James shrugged. "I do not know, maybe to a family if I am lucky enough to have one someday. Maybe to someone else who needs a second chance, the way Henry gave me one. I am not particular about it. I just want to build something that lasts." "That is a good goal," Clara said quietly. "What about you?" James asked. If you were not out here in the desert, if you were somewhere else, anywhere else, what would you want your life to look like? Clara opened her mouth to say she had no idea, that she could not imagine a future at all, but stopped herself. That was not entirely true. In the quiet moments before sleep, in those brief seconds before she remembered her losses, she sometimes had flashes of things she wanted. "I would want to be useful," she said slowly. "When I was younger, I wanted to be a teacher. I love books, love learning, love the idea of helping children discover the world. But that was not a practical dream," my father said. "I was supposed to marry well and run a household, and that was what I did." "Why is it not practical?" James asked. "There are teachers all over the territory. Schools are always looking for educated women." "I only went to school until I was 16, Clara said. "I am not qualified." "You are more qualified than half the people teaching out here," James said. "Most frontier teachers barely have more education than their students." "If you can read, write, and do arithmetic, you can teach." Clara felt something stir in her chest, something that might have been interest. "I have not thought about it in years." "Maybe you should think about it now," James suggested. "I am not saying you need to make any decisions tonight. I am just saying that there are possibilities. Your life is not over just because it did not turn out the way you planned." They walked on, and Clara turned James's words over in her mind. Could she really start again? Could she take the broken pieces of her life and arrange them into something new? It seemed impossible, but then again, a few hours ago it had seemed impossible that she would be walking through the desert having a conversation with a kind stranger instead of lying down to die. The terrain began to change as they walked. They were entering a region of larger rock formations, great towers of stone that rose like monuments in the moonlight. James led them carefully between the rocks, warning her about loose stones and sudden drops. Clara followed, her exhaustion forgotten in the strange beauty of their surroundings. "I have never seen anything like this," she said, looking up at the towering formations. "It is like another world." "The desert has places like this," James said, "hidden places that most people never see. I used to think the desert was just empty, but the more time I spend here, the more I realize it is full of secrets." They found a relatively flat area between two large rocks, and James suggested they rest for a while. Clara sank down gratefully onto a smooth boulder, and James sat nearby, not too close but not distant either. He pulled a canteen from his belt. Clara had not even noticed he was carrying one, and offered it to her. "You should drink," he said. "You have been walking for hours." Clara took the canteen and drank deeply. The water was warm but tasted better than anything she could remember. She handed it back to James, who also drank before capping it and setting it between them. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Clara thought about it. "Tired," she admitted. "Confused. I came out here so certain of what I wanted, and now I do not know any more. You have made me doubt myself, Mr. Garrett." "James," he corrected again. "And good. Doubt is better than certainty when it comes to dying. Doubt means you are thinking, questioning, staying open to other possibilities." "I suppose so." Clara looked out at the desert, at the landscape she had intended to be her grave. It looked different now, less like an ending and more like simply a place, no more meaningful than any other. "Can I ask you something? Anything? If I had told you to leave me alone, if I had refused to talk to you, would you have actually let me walk to my death?" James was quiet for a moment. "No," he said finally. "I would have followed you until you collapsed or until you physically attacked me. And even then, I would have done everything I could to get you back to town safely. I would not have let you die alone in the desert if I could help it. Even though you do not know me, especially because I do not know you," James said. "If I knew you and thought you were a terrible person, I might be tempted to respect your wishes. But you are a stranger, which means you are a person with a whole life I know nothing about, a person who has value and worth beyond your pain. I could not walk away from that." Clara felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been frozen for months. "You are a good man, James Garrett." "I am a man who has made a lot of mistakes and is trying to do better," James corrected. "There is a difference." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Clara found herself studying him in the moonlight. He had a strong profile, she noticed. A straight nose, a firm jaw, lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun. His hands, resting on his knees, were scarred and weathered but somehow gentle-looking. There was something solid about him, something dependable. He was the kind of man you could lean on, she thought, and then immediately pushed the thought away. She was in no position to be thinking about men, about relationships, about anything like that. But the thought persisted anyway, unwelcome but insistent. What would it be like to have someone like James in her life? Someone who would walk with her through the darkness, who would talk to her until the sun rose, who would refuse to let her give up even when she wanted to. She had loved Thomas, had grieved him deeply, but she realized now that Thomas had never really seen her the way James seemed to see her. Thomas had loved the idea of her, a pretty wife to grace his home, a mother for his future children. But he had never asked her what she wanted, what she dreamed about, what scared her in the night. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, and Clara realized she had been staring at him. "Nothing important," she said quickly, embarrassed. "I doubt that." James smiled slightly. "But you do not have to tell me if you do not want to. We have shared a lot tonight, but you are still entitled to your private thoughts." Clara hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I was thinking about Thomas, about our marriage. We were only together for 6 weeks, but even in that short time, I was starting to realize that we did not really know each other. We had built our relationship on letters, on ideas of who we wanted each other to be, rather than on reality. I loved him, but I am not sure we would have been happy together in the long run." "That is a hard thing to realize," James said gently. "It feels disloyal," Clara admitted. "He is dead, and I am sitting here thinking about the flaws in our marriage. What kind of person does that make me?" "An honest one," James said. "Grief does not require you to pretend the dead were perfect. You can love someone and still see them clearly. In fact, I think that is the truest kind of love, the kind that sees all the flaws and loves anyway." Clara thought about that. "Did you ever love someone?" "Before the war, maybe," James nodded. "There was a girl back home, Sarah. We were going to get married, had it all planned out. But then the war came and I enlisted, and by the time I came back she had married someone else. I was angry at first, felt betrayed, but I understand now. She could not wait forever for a boy who might never return, and the man who did return was not the boy she had fallen in love with anyway." "Do you still think about her?" "Sometimes," James admitted. "But not with pain anymore. I hope she is happy. I hope she has the life she wanted. And I am grateful, in a strange way, that she did not wait for me. I was in no condition to be anyone's husband when I came back from the war. I would have made her miserable." "And now?" Clara asked, then immediately regretted the question. It was too forward, too presumptuous. But James did not seem offended. "Now I am in a different place," he said. "I have done the work of putting myself back together, at least as much as anyone ever really does. I am ready for something more than just surviving, if that makes sense. I am ready to build a life that includes other people, that includes connection and love and all those things I thought I did not deserve." Clara felt her heart beating faster. There was something in the way he said it, in the way he looked at her, that made her think he was not speaking hypothetically. But that was ridiculous. They had just met. They were strangers having a strange conversation in the desert in the middle of the night. This was not the beginning of a romance. This was just two broken people keeping each other company. But even as she thought it, Clara knew she was lying to herself. Something was happening between them, something real and powerful and terrifying. She could feel it in the air between them, in the careful way they spoke to each other, in the fact that she had told him things she had never told anyone. This was not nothing. This was something significant, even if she had no idea what to do about it. "We should keep walking," James said, standing and offering her his hand. "The night is getting on, and I want to show you something before the sun comes up." Clara took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They were standing close now, closer than they had been before, and she could smell the desert dust on him, mixed with leather and horse and something indefinably male. She looked up at him, and for a moment they just stood there, hands clasped, eyes locked. Then James stepped back, releasing her hand, and the moment passed. They walked on through the rock formations, and James kept up a steady stream of conversation. He told her about the animals of the desert, the javelinas that traveled in groups and could be dangerous if cornered, the roadrunners that were faster than they looked, the Gila monsters that were beautiful and deadly. He pointed out tracks in the sand and told her what had made them. He showed her a cactus that stored water in its flesh and another that produced fruit the Apache people harvested. The desert, as he described it, was not a wasteland but a complex ecosystem where everything had its place and purpose. "You love it here," Clara observed. "I do," James admitted. "It took me a while to see it, but yes. There is something about this land that appeals to me. It is honest, if that makes sense. It does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. It is hard and unforgiving, but it is also beautiful and full of life. You just have to look closely to see it." "I think I am beginning to understand that," Clara said softly. They climbed another rise, and James stopped at the top. "This is what I wanted to show you," he said. Clara looked and caught her breath. They were standing at the edge of a vast valley, and beyond it, the mountains rose in layers of shadow and starlight. But what took her breath away was the sky. The moon was setting now, sinking toward the western horizon, and the stars were so bright they seemed close enough to touch. She had never seen so many stars, had never imagined the sky could hold such vastness. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Wait," James said. "It gets better." They stood in silence, and Clara watched as the sky began to change. The blackness softened to deep blue, then lighter blue, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, a line of gold appeared on the eastern horizon. The sun was coming. "I have been thinking about what you said earlier," James said quietly, his eyes on the horizon. "About not knowing who you are anymore. I think that is all right. I think we get to decide who we are every single day. The past does not have to define us unless we let it." "That is easy to say," Clara said, but without bitterness. "I know, living it is harder. But I have found that it helps to have something to work toward, some goal or purpose that gets you out of bed in the morning. It does not have to be grand. It can be as simple as deciding to see one more sunrise, or finishing one more task, or being kind to one more person. Small steps, Clara. That is all any of us can manage." The gold line on the horizon was widening, spreading, and the first rays of sunlight touched the tops of the distant mountains. The world began to come alive with color, the rocks turning red and orange, the sand glowing warm, the sky shifting through shades of pink and purple and blue. Clara had seen hundreds of sunrises in her life, but she had never really watched one before, had never paid attention to the miracle of light returning to the world. "I am glad you followed me," she said suddenly. "I am glad you did not let me walk into the desert alone." James turned to look at her, and in the growing light she could see his face clearly for the first time. He was handsome, she realized, but more than that, he was kind. It was there in every line of his face, in the gentle way he looked at her, in the small smile that curved his lips. "I am glad too," he said, "more glad than I can say." They stood side by side and watched the sun rise over the Arizona territory. Clara felt something shifting inside her, something that had been locked tight for months beginning to loosen. She was not healed. She knew that healing would take far longer than one night of walking and talking, but she was open to the possibility of healing. She was willing to consider that there might be a future beyond her grief, that there might be reasons to keep living even when it hurt. When the sun was fully above the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber, James turned to her. "What do you want to do now?" he asked. "We can keep walking if you want. We can head back to Tombstone. We can do whatever you need." Clara thought about it. What did she want? For months, the answer had been nothing. She had wanted nothing except for the pain to stop, for the emptiness to be filled, for her life to mean something again. But now, standing in the desert with the sun warming her face and a kind man beside her, she found she had an answer. "I want to go back," she said. I want to go back to Tombstone and I want to figure out what comes next. I want to look into teaching, maybe. I want to find a way to be useful, to be part of something. I want to stop hiding in my room and start living again, even if it is hard, even if it hurts. James's smile widened. That is a good answer, a very good answer. But not today, Clara added. Today I just want to rest. I am exhausted and I think I need to sleep for about 12 hours. James laughed, a warm sound that made Clara smile. That seems reasonable. Come on, let us head back. It is a long walk, but we will take it slow. They began the journey back toward Tombstone, retracing their steps through the now bright desert. Everything looked different in daylight, less mysterious perhaps, but more real. Clara could see the full extent of how far they had walked, and she marveled that she had come so far on nothing but despair and determination. But she had also walked back, she reminded herself. She was choosing to return, choosing to try again, and that mattered. As they walked, James continued to talk, but the conversation shifted. He asked about her practical situation, where she was staying, how much money she had, what her immediate needs were. Clara answered honestly. She had a little money left from what Thomas had saved, enough for a few more months of rent at the boarding house if she was careful. She had no job and no real prospects, but she was educated and capable. She would find something. If you are serious about teaching, James said, I know some people in Tucson who might be able to help. There is a schoolhouse there that is always looking for teachers, and the town is growing fast. It might be easier to find work there than in Tombstone. Tucson, Clara repeated, considering it. That is where your ranch is, near there. Yes, James said, and there was something careful in his voice. About 15 miles out, but that is not why I am suggesting it. I genuinely think you would have better opportunities there. Of course, Clara said quickly, embarrassed that he had felt the need to clarify. I did not mean to suggest otherwise. They walked in silence for a moment, and then James said, Though I would be lying if I said I would not be happy to have you nearby. I have enjoyed talking with you, Clara. More than enjoyed it, actually. This has been one of the most meaningful conversations I have had in years. Clara felt her cheeks warming, and not from the sun. I have enjoyed it too, she admitted. You are easy to talk to, James. You listen without judging, and you share without demanding anything in return. That is a rare quality. So are you, James said, glancing at her. You are brave and honest and stronger than you realize. I know you do not feel strong right now, but you are. You walked into the desert to die, but when someone offered you a reason to live, you were willing to listen. That takes tremendous courage. Clara did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They walked on, the sun climbing higher in the sky, the heat beginning to build. By the time Tombstone came into view, Clara was stumbling with exhaustion, her feet blistered and aching, her throat dry despite the water James had shared with her. But she had made it. She had walked into the desert and walked back out again, and that felt like an accomplishment worth celebrating. As they reached the edge of town, James stopped. I will walk you to your boarding house if you want, he said. But I do not want to cause any gossip or make things awkward for you. A woman walking into town at sunrise with a man who is not her husband, people will talk. Let them talk, Clara said firmly. I do not care what people think anymore. You saved my life tonight, James. The least I can do is walk openly beside you. James smiled at that. All right then, lead the way. Clara led him through the awakening streets of Tombstone to the modest boarding house where she rented a room. A few early risers stared at them as they passed, and Clara could already hear the gossip starting in her mind, but she held her head high. James was right. She was stronger than she realized, and she was done hiding from the world. At the door to the boarding house, Clara turned to face James. In the full light of day, with the magic of the night fading behind them, she felt suddenly awkward. What did you say to someone who had talked you out of dying? How did you thank someone for giving you back your life? I do not know how to thank you, she said finally. What you did tonight, following me, talking to me, staying with me until sunrise, I will never forget it. You gave me a gift I did not think I wanted, but I am grateful for it now. James shook his head. You do not need to thank me. I did what anyone would have done. No, Clara said firmly, not anyone. Most people would have looked away, would have decided it was not their business, would have let me walk into the desert alone. You chose to follow me, to care about a stranger, to spend your whole night keeping me company. That is not what everyone would do. That is what a good man does. James looked at her, and Clara saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "I know this has been a strange night, and I know you need time to rest and figure things out, but I would like to see you again if you would allow it. Maybe I could come back to Tombstone in a few days, take you to dinner, talk some more." Clara knew she should say no. She should take time to grieve properly, to heal, to figure out who she was without Thomas. She should not be thinking about other men, about new relationships, about anything like that. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "Yes, I would like that." James's smile was like the sunrise all over again, bright and warm and full of promise. "Good. I have some business to take care of at my ranch, but I will be back in 3 days. Will you be all right until then?" "I will be fine," Clara assured him. "I am going to sleep, and then I am going to start figuring out my next steps. Maybe I will inquire about teaching positions. Maybe I will write to my sister, let her know I am all right. Maybe I will just sit and think for a while, but I will be here when you come back." "Good," James said again. He reached out and took her hand, holding it gently in his. "Thank you for walking with me tonight, Clara. Thank you for talking to me, for trusting me enough to share your story. I hope you know how much it meant to me." "It meant something to me too," Clara said softly. James released her hand reluctantly and stepped back. 3 days, he said. "I will be here." "I will be waiting," Clara promised. She watched him walk away, his long strides carrying him quickly down the street and out of sight. Then she turned and entered the boarding house, climbing the stairs to her room with legs that felt like lead. Inside, everything was exactly as she had left it. The half-eaten meal on the table, the letters from her sister, the narrow bed with its thin blanket. But somehow it all looked different. This was not a prison anymore. It was just a room, a temporary place, a starting point for whatever came next. Clara collapsed onto the bed without even removing her dusty clothes. She was asleep within seconds, and for the first time in months, her dreams were not filled with loss and grief. Instead, she dreamed of sunrises and desert flowers, of stars so bright they lit up the sky, of a voice talking steadily through the darkness, refusing to let her go. When she woke, it was late afternoon and someone was knocking on her door. Clara sat up groggily, disoriented and stiff. "Who is it?" She called. "It is Mrs. Henderson, dear." The boarding house owner's voice was concerned. "I heard you came in this morning looking half dead. I brought you some food and water." Clara got up and opened the door. "Mrs. Henderson was a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She carried a tray with bread, cheese, and a pitcher of water, and her gaze swept over Clara with obvious concern. "You look terrible," she said bluntly. "Where were you all night?" "Walking," Clara said, taking the tray gratefully. "I needed to think." "Walking," Mrs. Henderson repeated skeptically. "With that cowboy I saw you come back with." Clara felt herself blushing. "He was kind enough to walk with me. It was perfectly innocent." "I am sure it was, Mrs. Henderson said, though her tone suggested she was not sure at all. "But you need to be careful, dear. This town is full of gossips, and they will make something out of nothing if you give them the chance." "I do not care what people say," Clara said, and meant it. "I have bigger concerns than gossip." Mrs. Henderson studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You look different," she observed. "I cannot put my finger on it, but there is something changed about you." "Maybe there is," Clara said. "Maybe I am finally starting to figure things out." After Mrs. Henderson left, Clara ate hungrily and drank almost all the water. Then she washed herself as best she could with the basin in her room, changed into clean clothes, and sat down to think. 3 days. She had 3 days before James came back, 3 days to decide what she wanted, 3 days to take the first steps toward a new life. She started by writing a letter to her sister in Philadelphia. It was a long letter, honest in a way she had not been since Thomas died. She wrote about her grief, about how close she had come to giving up, about the cowboy who had followed her into the desert and talked her through the night. She wrote about the possibility of teaching, about maybe moving to Tucson, about trying to build something new from the ruins of her old plans. She did not know if her sister would understand, but it felt good to put it all into words. The next day, Clara went to the general store and asked about teaching positions. The clerk looked at her doubtfully. Everyone in Tombstone knew her story, knew about Thomas and the baby, but he gave her the name of a man in Tucson who handled hiring for the schools. Clara wrote down the information carefully, feeling a flutter of something that might have been hope. On the third day, Clara woke early and spent extra time on her appearance. She told herself it was not vanity, that she just wanted to look presentable, but she knew she was lying. She wanted to look nice for James. She wanted him to see her as something other than the broken woman he had found walking into the desert. James arrived in the late morning, riding a sturdy bay horse and leading another. He tied them both outside the boarding house and came to the door, hat in hand, looking nervous in a way that was endearing. Clara met him in the parlor, very aware of Mrs. Henderson hovering nearby with obvious interest. "You came," Clara said, smiling. "I said I would," James replied. "I always keep my word. How are you?" "Better," Clara said honestly. "I have been resting, thinking, making plans. I wrote to my sister. I got information about teaching positions in Tucson. I am taking small steps, like you said." "That is good. I am proud of you." James glanced at Mrs. Henderson, who was not even pretending not to listen. "Would you like to take a walk with me? Maybe get some lunch?" "I would like that very much," Clara said. They left the boarding house and walked through town, drawing stares and whispers but ignoring them. James had obviously cleaned up for the occasion. His clothes were neat, his hair combed, his boots polished. He looked at Clara like she was something precious, something worth his time and attention, and it made her feel seen in a way she had not felt in a very long time. Over lunch at a small restaurant, they talked about everything and nothing. James told her about his ranch, about the work he had been doing to prepare for winter, about his plans for expansion. Clara told him about her letter to her sister, about the teaching position in Tucson, about the small ways she was trying to rebuild her life. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, as if they had known each other for years rather than days. "I was thinking," James said as they finished eating. "If you are serious about going to Tucson, I could take you there. Introduce you to the people I know, show you around, help you get settled. Only if you want, of course. I am not trying to pressure you or anything like that." Clara considered the offer. It was practical. She would need help navigating a new town, finding a place to live, making connections. But it was also more than practical. It was James offering to be part of her life, to help her take these next steps, to continue the connection they had started in the desert. "I would appreciate that," she said carefully, "but I do not want you to feel obligated. You have already done so much for me." "I do not feel obligated," James said firmly. "I want to help you, Clara. I want to spend time with you. I want to see where this goes, whatever this is between us. If that is too forward, if you need more time to grieve or to figure things out, I understand. But I want you to know that I am interested, more than interested." Clara felt her heart racing. "You barely know me." "I know enough," James said. "I know you are brave and honest and kind. I know you have been through terrible things and are still trying to find reasons to keep going. I know you make me want to be a better man than I have been. That is enough to make me want to know more." Clara looked at him across the table, this man who had appeared in her life at exactly the right moment, who had refused to let her give up, who was offering her not just help but hope. She thought about Thomas, about the guilt she felt at even considering another man so soon. But Thomas was gone and she was still here, and James was real and present and looking at her like she mattered. "I am interested too," she admitted quietly. "But I am scared. Everything happened so fast with Thomas. We barely knew each other before we married, and look how that turned out. I do not want to make the same mistake again." "Then we will take it slow," James said. "We will get to know each other properly, take our time, make sure this is real and not just two lonely people finding comfort in each other. "I am not going anywhere, Clara. I can be patient." Clara smiled, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. Slow sounds good. They spent the rest of the day together, walking through Tombstone, talking about their pasts and their hopes for the future. James was easy company, never demanding, never pushing for more than Clara was ready to give. By the time he left that evening, promising to return in a few days to take her to Tucson if she decided to go, Clara felt lighter than she had in months. Over the next 2 weeks, James came to Tombstone 3 more times. Each visit was longer than the last, and each time Clara felt herself falling a little more. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their regrets, their dreams. James told her about the war, about the things he had seen and done that still haunted him. Clara told him about her mother's death, about her father's remarriage, about feeling like she never quite belonged anywhere. They shared their scars and their hopes, and slowly, carefully, they began to build something real. Finally, Clara made her decision. She would go to Tucson. She would apply for the teaching position. She would start a new life in a new town, with or without James, though she hoped it would be with him. Mrs. Henderson was sorry to see her go but understood, and she even helped Clara pack her few belongings. The day Clara left Tombstone, James arrived with a wagon instead of horses. "I thought you might have things to transport," he explained, "and it is more comfortable for a long journey." They left town in the early morning before the heat of the day set in. Clara looked back once at Tombstone, at the place where she had been married and widowed and bereaved, where she had almost given up entirely. She felt no nostalgia, no desire to return. That chapter of her life was closed. Whatever came next would be written elsewhere. The journey to Tucson took most of the day. James kept up a running commentary about the landscape, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the area. He showed her where his ranch was, visible in the distance, a small cabin with a corral and a few outbuildings, modest but neat. Clara tried to imagine herself there and found she could. It was a peaceful place, the kind of place where a person could heal. Tucson was larger than Tombstone, more established, with wider streets and more substantial buildings. James took her to a boarding house run by a friend of his, a woman named Mrs. Garcia who welcomed Clara warmly. Then he took her to meet Mr. Thompson, the man who hired teachers for the local school, Mr. Thompson was a thin, nervous man with wire-rimmed spectacles, but he brightened when James introduced Clara. "You come highly recommended," he said, shaking her hand. "James tells me you are educated and eager to teach. We are always in need of good teachers, especially women who can work with the younger children." "I would be honored to teach," Clara said. "I love children and learning, and I want to be useful to this community." "Can you start in January?" Mr. Thompson asked. "The current teacher is leaving after the new year, and we will need someone to take over her position." "January," Clara repeated, her mind racing. That was only 6 weeks away. Could she really do this? Could she stand in front of a classroom and teach children when her own life still felt so uncertain? But then she felt James's presence beside her, steady and reassuring, and she thought about the desert sunrise, about choosing to walk back toward life instead of away from it. This was just another step, another choice to keep going. "Yes," she said firmly. "I can start in January," Mr. Thompson smiled. "Excellent, let me show you the schoolhouse and we can discuss the details." The next hour passed in a blur of information about curricula and schedules and expectations. The schoolhouse was a simple wooden building with rows of desks and a blackboard, but to Clara it looked like possibility. This was something she could do, something meaningful that would give structure to her days and purpose to her life. When they finally left, James looked at her with pride. "You did well," he said. "He was impressed with you." "I was terrified," Clara admitted, "but I think I can do this." "I want to do this." "I know you can," James said. "You can do anything you set your mind to, Clara. I believe that." They had dinner that evening at a small restaurant, and afterward James walked her back to Mrs. Garcia's boarding house. At the door, he hesitated, then said, I know you need time to settle in to prepare for the teaching position to figure out your new life here, but I want to see you again as often as you will allow it. Would that be all right? More than all right, Clara said. I would like that very much. James smiled, and before Clara could think better of it, she leaned forward and kissed him on the cheek. It was a brief kiss, barely more than a brush of lips against skin, but James looked stunned and pleased. "Good night, James," Clara said, blushing. "Good night, Clara," he replied, touching his cheek where she had kissed him. "I will see you soon." The weeks before January passed quickly. Clara threw herself into preparing for her teaching position, reading every book she could find on pedagogy and child development, planning lessons, thinking about how to manage a classroom full of children with different needs and abilities. James visited often, sometimes bringing supplies she needed, sometimes just bringing himself and his easy conversation. They took long walks around Tucson, exploring the area, talking endlessly. Clara met his friends and he met hers. Slowly, they wove themselves into each other's lives. On Christmas Day, James invited Clara to his ranch for dinner. It was the first time she had been there, and Clara was nervous as they rode out from town, but when they arrived, she fell in love with the place immediately. The cabin was small but well built, with a stone fireplace and windows that let in the winter sunlight. The land around it was beautiful, high desert dotted with mesquite and palo verde trees, with views of the mountains in the distance. James had obviously worked hard to prepare for her visit. The cabin was clean, a fire was burning in the fireplace, and he had cooked a simple but delicious meal of roast chicken and vegetables. They ate at a small wooden table, and James told her about his plans for the ranch, building a larger house someday, expanding his herd, maybe hiring some help. Clara listened and asked questions and felt, for the first time since Thomas's death, like she was part of something. After dinner, they sat by the fire and James gave her a gift, a small leather-bound journal. "For your teaching," he explained. "To record your thoughts, your successes, your challenges, I thought it might be useful." Clara was touched. "It is perfect, thank you." "I have something else," James said, and his voice was suddenly nervous. "Something I have been wanting to say for a while now, but I did not know if it was too soon." Clara's heart started beating faster. "What is it?" James took her hands in his, holding them gently. "I know we have only known each other for a few months. I know you are still grieving your husband, still building your new life, but I need you to know how I feel. From the moment I saw you walking into that desert, something in me recognized you. I do not know if I believe in fate, but I believe in this. I believe in you. And I am falling in love with you, Clara. Maybe I have been falling in love with you since that first night when you talked to me until the sun rose." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were not sad tears. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I have been fighting it, feeling guilty about it, trying to convince myself it is too soon. But it is there anyway. You make me want to live, James. You make me believe that good things can still happen, that I can be happy again." James pulled her close and Clara let herself lean into his embrace. They sat there by the fire for a long time, holding each other, not needing words. Finally, James spoke again. "I am not asking you to marry me," he said. "Not yet. We both need more time and I want to do this right. But I am asking if you will let me court you properly, if you will give us a chance to see where this goes." "Yes," Clara said without hesitation. "Yes, I will." They kissed then, a real kiss this time, and it felt like coming home. Clara had loved Thomas, but this was different, deeper, more honest, built on a foundation of real understanding rather than romantic ideals. This was love born from darkness and despair, from a choice to keep living, from a desert sunrise and a conversation that lasted through the night. Clara started teaching in January, and she loved it. The children were challenging but rewarding, and she found she had a gift for explaining complex ideas in simple terms, for making learning fun and engaging. She threw herself into the work with passion, and her students responded to her enthusiasm. By spring, the schoolhouse was full of children who loved their teacher and parents who were grateful for her dedication. James continued to court her properly, taking her to dances and church socials, introducing her to more of his friends, showing her every part of his life. In turn, Clara brought James into hers, letting him meet her students, sharing her love of books and learning, teaching him things about the world beyond the ranch. They were building something together, brick by brick, conversation by conversation. In May, on the 6-month anniversary of the night they met, James took Clara back to the place in the desert where they had watched the sunrise together. He had packed a picnic, and they sat among the rocks and ate and talked like they had that first night. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, James pulled a small box from his pocket. "I told you I was not going to ask you to marry me that night at Christmas," he said, "but I think enough time has passed. I think we have done this right, taken our time, built something real. Clara Brennan, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you, supporting you, walking with you through whatever comes next?" Clara was crying openly now, but she was smiling too. "Yes," she said. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." James slipped a simple gold ring onto her finger and they kissed as the sun set over the desert. It was not where Clara had thought her life would lead. A year ago, she had been walking into this same desert to die. But here she was, alive and happy and in love, with a man who had refused to let her give up, who had talked to her until the sun rose and changed everything. They were married in August, in a small ceremony at the church in Tucson. Clara's sister came from Philadelphia and wept through the entire ceremony, but they were happy tears. James's sisters came from Kentucky, and they embraced Clara like she was already family. The wedding was simple but joyful, full of friends and laughter and hope for the future. Clara moved to the ranch after the wedding, and together she and James began building their life. Clara continued to teach during the school year, and James worked the ranch, and somehow they made it all work. They were partners in every sense of the word, sharing the labor and the decisions and the dreams for what they wanted to build together. In the spring of 1883, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The news brought a complex mix of emotions, joy certainly, but also fear. She remembered her first pregnancy, remembered the loss, and she was terrified it would happen again. But James held her through the fear, reminded her that this was a different time, a different place, a different life. And when their son was born in December of that year, healthy and squalling and perfect, Clara wept with relief and gratitude. They named him Henry, after the rancher who had given James his second chance. Henry Garrett grew up on the ranch, learning to ride almost before he could walk, following his father around like a shadow. Clara watched James with their son and saw yet another side of the man she had married, patient, playful, endlessly loving. He was the father she had dreamed of for her children, and she was grateful every day that she had lived to see it. 2 years later, they had a daughter, whom they named Sarah after James's first love. Clara was not jealous. She understood that honoring the past did not diminish the present. Sarah was a wild, joyful child, always climbing things she should not climb, always asking questions faster than Clara could answer them. She kept them busy and exhausted and happier than they had ever imagined possible. The ranch prospered as the years passed. James proved to be a skilled rancher, and with Clara's help managing the business side of things, they were able to expand gradually. They hired help when they needed it, built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, became respected members of the Tucson community. Clara continued to teach for several more years, until the demands of the ranch and the children made it impossible to do both. But she never stopped loving learning, and she made sure her own children grew up in a house full of books and curiosity. In 1890, 9 years after they met, James and Clara took their children back to the desert where it had all begun. Henry was 7, Sarah was 5, and they were fascinated by the story of how their parents had met. Clara told them a simplified version, that she had been very sad once, and their father had found her and helped her be happy again. The children accepted this easily, the way children do, and then ran off to explore the rocks and chase lizards. James and Clara stood together, watching their children play, and Clara leaned her head on James's shoulder. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "All the time," James said. "I think about how close I came to not following you, to deciding it was not my business, to just riding on to my ranch and never looking back. I think about how different my life would be if I had made that choice." "I think about it too," Clara said. "I think about how certain I was that there was nothing left to live for, how wrong I was. If you had not followed me, if you had not talked to me until the sun rose, I would never have known this life. I would never have had you or Henry or Sarah or any of this." "You would have found your way," James said gently. "You are stronger than you know." "Maybe," Clara said, "but I am glad I did not have to find it alone." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. It was not the same as that first sunrise. They had seen hundreds of sunrises together since then, but it was special in its own way. It was a reminder of where they had started, of the journey they had taken, of the life they had built from darkness and despair. As the years continued to pass, Clara and James grew old together on the ranch. They saw their children grow up, watched Henry take over the ranching business with skill and dedication, watched Sarah become a teacher like her mother, carrying on the love of learning. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, and through it all they remained partners, best friends, lovers who had chosen each other in the darkest of times and never stopped choosing each other. On their 30th wedding anniversary, when Clara was 53 and James was 56, they took one last trip to the desert. They were older now, slower, but they still made the walk out to their special place. They sat on the same rocks where James had proposed, and they watched the sun set just as they had so many years before. "I never thanked you properly," Clara said, "for following me that night, for refusing to let me give up, for talking to me until the sun rose and showing me that life was still worth living." James took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "You have thanked me every day we have had together," he said. "Every morning I wake up next to you, every meal we share, every laugh, every conversation, every moment, that is all the thanks I need." "I love you," Clara said. "I have loved you since that night in the desert, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," James replied. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Garrett. Following you into that desert was the smartest decision I ever made." They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon, as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, as the desert came alive with the sounds of night. They had walked through darkness together and found light. They had chosen life when death seemed easier. They had built something beautiful from broken pieces, and they would carry that with them for whatever time they had left. When they finally stood to make the journey back home, Clara looked out at the desert one last time. It was still harsh, still unforgiving, still a place where mistakes could be fatal. But it was also the place where she had been saved, where she had found love, where her real life had begun. She would always be grateful to this desert, to this night, to the man who had refused to let her walk into it alone. "Ready to go home?" James asked, offering his arm. Clara took it, smiling. "Always," she said, "as long as home is wherever you are." They walked back toward the ranch under a sky full of stars. Two people who had found each other in the darkness and held on tight, who had talked through the longest night of their lives and emerged into a sunrise more beautiful than they could have imagined. They had built a life together, raised a family, grown old side by side. And through it all they had never forgotten that first night, that first conversation, that first choice to keep living. Behind them, the desert stretched out vast and ancient and indifferent. But for Clara and James, it would always be the place where everything changed, where death became life, where despair became hope, where a cowboy followed a broken woman into the darkness and talked until the sun rose, and in doing so, saved them both. Their story did not end with grand gestures or dramatic moments. It ended the way the best love stories do, with two people who chose each other, day after day, year after year, through good times and hard times, through joy and sorrow, through all the ordinary moments that make up a life. They had started in extraordinary circumstances, but they had built something ordinary and beautiful and real. They had built a home, a family, a legacy of love that would outlast them both. When James died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Clara grieved deeply, but without the desperate despair that had once driven her into the desert. She had had 47 years with him, 47 years of love and partnership and shared life. She had memories enough to fill 1,000 lifetimes, and she was grateful for every single one. She continued to live on the ranch for several more years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them part of the legacy she and James had built together. When Clara finally passed away at the age of 85, it was in the same bed where she had slept beside James for decades, in the house they had built together, on the land that had become their home. Her last thoughts were of him, of his voice in the darkness, of his patience and kindness, of the way he had refused to let her give up. She thought of the desert sunrise, of the moment she had chosen to turn back toward life, of everything that choice had brought her. They were buried side by side in the cemetery in Tucson, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names, their dates, and a single inscription. They walked together until the sun rose and kept walking for a lifetime. The story of how they met became family legend, passed down through generations. Their descendants would tell their own children about the night Clara walked into the desert to die and James followed her and talked until the sun rose, about how that one conversation changed everything, about how choosing life, even when it was hard, even when it hurt, could lead to more beauty and love and joy than anyone could imagine. The ranch continued for generations, worked by their children and their children's children, a testament to what two broken people could build when they found each other and refused to give up. The desert remained unchanged, vast and harsh and beautiful, but for the Garrett family, it would always be sacred ground, the place where their story began, where death became life, where a conversation that lasted through the darkness saved two souls and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And sometimes, when the family gathered at the ranch and told the old stories, someone would suggest taking a walk out to that special place in the desert. They would go at sunset, just as Clara and James had done so many times, and they would sit among the rocks and watch the stars come out and remember. They would remember that love can be found in the darkest places, that hope can survive the longest nights, that choosing to live, truly live, not just survive, is an act of courage that can change everything. They would remember Clara, who walked into the desert certain that death was her only escape, and James, who followed her and refused to let her go. They would remember the conversation that lasted until sunrise, the slow building of trust and understanding, the gradual transformation of despair into hope. They would remember that sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms, that sometimes the people who save us are strangers who choose to care, that sometimes the most important conversations are the ones that happen in the darkness when no one else is watching. And they would be grateful, grateful for Clara's choice to turn back, grateful for James's choice to follow, grateful for the life those two choices created, grateful for the love that grew from such unlikely soil. They would sit in the desert as the night deepened and the stars brightened, and they would feel connected to something larger than themselves, to a story of survival and love that had shaped their entire family, to the moment when everything changed because one person followed another into the darkness and talked until the sun rose. The desert would stand silent witness, as it had that first night and every night since, unchanging and eternal, holding the memory of two people who found each other when they most needed it, who built a love that lasted a lifetime, who proved that even in the darkest moments there is always hope, always possibility, always a reason to keep walking until the sun rises and the world is made new again.